periods. Let's talk about it, okay? And so that's what virgin actually means. Sisters gotta stick together.
What do I always say?
Listen to your pussy.
She never lies.
Sister Strain here.
Your favorite feisty feminist filmmaking duo.
You're listening to The Sister Strain. And we're back.
And we're back.
We're breathing a little bit of a cold. Cat more
Yes.
so Steffi knows than me.
I got
but
that sexy, cold voice, so...
Yeah, we'll go with it. The show must go on.
The show must always go on. Okay, so today our topic is something we are very passionate about. Although we are passionate about many things.
Yeah, but this is a little more personal to our experience.
Yes.
Female filmmaking.
Yeah, so as a little bit about us, for anyone who doesn't know our journey as female filmmakers, we have been in the acting industry since we were about 13, but we started in our early 20s writing and producing our own content. So we have an array of short film projects, some dramatic, some comedic. We have a mock music video, a couple of web series.
We now have our directorial debut feature film.
Yeah,
a couple other films we've been pitching for funding.
Yes, and we're currently in production for our first documentary project.
Yeah.
Okay, so that sounds like quite an array of work, but we are actually still self-funding all of this and struggling to find opportunity for financing.
Yeah, not to like be like too, on the soapbox angsty about it, but we have found it very difficult as women to find funding sources.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is throughout our 20s, we did work on a lot of big projects and we did meet a lot of like higher ups in the industry who predominantly were older gentlemen. We didn't come across a lot of females in our working experience. So naturally you want to build those relationships. You want to reach out for reference letters. You want to pitch projects. And we found pretty early on that oftentimes when we were taking business meetings, the intentions of the other party of that business meeting was not
business oriented.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there was business they wanted. It just had more to
not
do
the
with
business
our,
we were looking to discuss.
it had more to do with our sexuality and our bodies and what we could provide them, as opposed to how we could build a working relationship of building art together.
So we stepped away a little bit and then started creating our own projects. I'd say in typical Sister Strain fashion, two things. One, when you're frustrated with something, find a way to fill that hole. So not having female mentors means we feel very impassioned to now start creating spaces where we can provide that mentorship to other filmmakers through our own trials and experience. And two, if we feel frustrated by something, we have to research it. We have to know, is it just me feeling this disparity and sense of injustice, or are there like stats and data to back it up?
Yeah.
And there are.
Yeah. There are.
Check your
Before we go
receipts,
into,
folks.
Yeah, before we go into the stats and data, I just wanted to speak a little more on the personal of like, when we talk about mentorship opportunities too, I'd love to just be able to sit here and be like, okay, so you're frustrated, you want to know how to do it? We did it. This is how you can do it too. And I have to stop there and say that and acknowledge the privilege that we are afforded in our lives, that we were really lucky when we were kind of down and out and we're like, how do we make any of this happen? How do we kind of get our dreams? Our parents not only were willing, but also had the space to allow us to move in with them. Our father also invited us into his business in the real estate world because he was doing well and needed help with paperwork. So we got our degree and came in, is it a degree? Maybe it's not a degree. I don't know. Anyway, we got our license. We did the paperwork and we've joined him in his business. So we were able to live at home, save our money, and then invest every single dollar that we have into our films. We also aren't married and don't have children. We chose to kind of focus on our work.
Our films are our babies.
Yeah, and so that privilege has allowed us the opportunity to have kind of a safe landing spot where we can take all of our money and put it into the work to try and make something so that we can put more content out. And then hopefully next time we go to rounds of meetings, we will be taken seriously because we have a body of work to show. And so it's kind of twofold there that I'm like, mentoring for us is more of the opportunity to like, we'll share the resources, we'll tell you what we've learned, we'll show you the paperwork, we're happy to share the process. We don't have like a tried and true, this is what you do. If you want to go out and do it, follow
this method and you will get funding and you will get distribution and your projects will get made and see the world.
We can tell you a lot of the processes. We can tell you a lot of the processes that we've seen male counterparts follow and seem to get the funding. But not to go too far into that frustration. We don't want to bring out too much of the jaded angst.
Yeah, what I'd like to talk about today, because a lot of people, especially if you're not involved in the film industry, might not know much about it and the experience for a female. I think we do all recognize that most of the names we really know in the industry, famous writers, directors, producers, do tend to belong to men. So I'm sure most people would recognize a little bit of like, why aren't as many women involved in the film industry? Is it because they're just not interested in the film industry, or they don't want those positions? And that's actually untrue. And so I think to understand where we are now, it's always more helpful to take a look at the past and understand where we have come from. And this is actually the most interesting thing about this topic is that when you do look to the past, it was actually quite an opposite structure. So, and we're
talking past like before talkies, so like silent film
the beginning of the silent era, moving pictures, essentially, late 1800s to early 1900s, okay? And so our resources, I'm just going to show you real quick. There is an author, Alicia Malone, who has 2 books here. One is called The Female Gaze, Essential Movies Made by Women. There's actually quite a few female directors and writers over the course of the history of cinema that don't get their due praise and did incredible projects. So this book is actually a closer look at all of these various different projects, the inspiration, the effect they had, how they changed the industry. So that's really cool for anyone who wants to learn more about those names that don't get celebrated. And then this one here called Backwards and in Heels: The Past, Present, and Future of Women Working in Film. Again, both of these by Alicia Malone, film reporter and critic.
Just hold up
A beautiful, I just wanted to read what it says on the back there. This sort of through-line theme of this book is, Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did. She just did it backwards and in heels. And so the first chapter, I'm going to share a little bit of that, talks about the past of females being involved in the film industry. Because, so the film industry, again, starting in the late 1800s with moving pictures, they found a way to take a series of photos and have them move on screen so that people could sort of watch a story unfold. So between the 1900s and 1920s, half of all movies made in the US were actually written and directed by women. All right, there was many famous actresses at the time who also had their own independent production houses and studios. And the first person to ever be coined a film editor was a woman. It was Margaret Booth. Before reading these books, I had never heard her name. I'm sure most of you haven't either. Her career spanned 7 decades.
Well, when we think of most of the like technical stuff in the film world, we think usually male and male-brained thinking of the
more
technical
masculine
side.
theme. So this woman started when you actually had to like take scissors and cut film strips and clip them together, right? It worked with all the greats. So I thought that was really cool. And again, we don't hear about these women as much. Okay, so these films started as Nickelodeons, right? They were 5 cents. So they would attract large crowds, sometimes very rowdy. And then as the progression of them grew, the studios decided, we want to attract a better audience. So their plan was to specifically draw to middle-aged, not middle-aged, well, any age, middle class is what I meant, middle class female audiences, because they thought, well, they will probably bring in their husbands or boyfriends and make it like a luxurious date night, and that'll bring more people in and we'll get rid of the rowdy crowds. Right, so they purposely plotted to have movie palaces near shopping centers.
Classic consumerism.
I know, right?
Preach to the ladies, and they will bring them in.
Well, and that's the feminine mystique that was carried out for a century or for generations after that, right? So they would put these movie palaces near shopping centers. They put coupons in magazines, and they even had free childcare to encourage women to want to come to the cinema more. So how do we attract middle-class female audiences? Well, we have females writing and directing the stories because they would know what types of stories would draw in women, right? So very interesting perspective shift. Nowadays, we have very male-oriented projects being made by men through the male perspective in hopes of garnering to male audiences. It was actually originally very opposite to that. Leading up into around the 1920s, there was an actress, Clara Bow, and she was widely successful as the new it girl because she played characters that had like very spirited attitudes, and they were very outspoken, and you know, she was the new sex symbol. She was embracing her sexuality, which interestingly enough led sort of women seeing this type of female experience led to the first wave of feminism, and encouraged the first round of protests and marches for women advocating for female rights, specifically the right to vote, which was passed in the 19th Amendment in 1920. So this type of filmmaking and the stories we were seeing about women and these expression of the female experience that we were starting to see different stars inhabit through being written by other females really encouraged women to start taking their place in the world and cinema.
Yeah. And so what happened, Kitty?
And so
tell us, what
how
went
did this
askew?
beautiful landscape for cinema
How did we get so
shift
derailed?
so drastically? Well, I'll tell you.
Okay.
Money.
Please do.
Money. So as cinema developed and the idea of talkies came about, right? So they were like, we can make moving pictures even better. Let's add sound. That requires a lot of money, okay? So at that time, we're talking 1920s, right? Yeah. Studios had to start bringing in banks or loans, ways to fund their projects more. So a lot of the independent studios shut down, a lot of those being the studios that were run by women, by actresses and
Now,
and
may
writers.
I just make a little remark here that we think of the times. Women didn't have their own bank accounts. Women didn't have their own finances. They relied on first their father and then through marital status, their husband to be the providers or
well, they were not financially independent.
leaders of the finances.
Yeah. And so when this structure of cinema changed from a creative endeavor to a more business oriented mindset, you know, the concept of, well, women aren't really like business oriented. They're not really leaders.
We can't trust them with the money.
We can't trust them with the money. Okay.
They don't do the money.
A woman can't be an executive. What?
They don't make good leaders.
And so naturally, the roles of director, producer, all that sort of thing, those executive positions got flushed out and passed down to men. And then we saw women who were previous to that very successful in the industry, their opportunities start to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle, right? And so from then on, from the 1930s on, Hollywood has become very much of a boys' club, okay? And I think most people probably see that, but like to actually get a little statistical fact here, okay? And I got this from the book. Between 1912 and 1919, Universal had 11 female directors who worked regularly and made a total of 170 films in those 7 years.
11 female directors making over 100 films. That's wild.
Okay, that's not even thinking about the writers and you know the rest of the team involved. But from the mid-1920s until 1982, the studio did not hire a single female filmmaker.
That's wild.
No writer, no director, no producer.
62 years.
Yeah.
62 years, not a single female. And we wonder why it's difficult for women to break into it in the last couple decades and today.
So, we can say now, okay, up until 1982, well, yes, so women were able to open bank accounts. They're able to be financially independent. However, when you're categorized a certain way for so many centuries, those stigmas carry down. So even if we did, acquire the right to vote and hold our own finances and the ability to have a credit card, still those studios have a very difficult time perceiving women as being capable of holding those executive positions of power, specifically with finances in a studio.
And now that Kat has shared a little bit of the past, I'd like to take us into the last couple of decades and to today. I also just wanted to say a little, as we mentioned, we live in our parents' house, which is the only way we're able to do all this stuff. And I was just hearing my parents talk downstairs, and I'm like, can the audiences hear that? Did you guys hear that? Can you hear them? I don't know. Curious.
Their secrets.
Yes, we are not alone. The support system we have does lend to the occasional dog bark and
this
chatting
podcast studio is we have slowly taken over every
extra
spare
space
spare inch
in our
of
parents' home.
space. Yes, so this was previously the guest room, and is now our creative space.
Yeah, if you're
podcast
wondering
studio.
how we're doing anything, infiltration. We have infiltrated this house.
We're
their
lucky
lives.
little bitches to have beautiful parents who support us.
Yeah, who are like, what's your next random dream, harebrained scheme you're up to? Okay, I guess go for it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Back to topic.
So you
okay,
may
I
hear
think one of the
some
biggest
stuff on
questions
occasion.
we get asked when we talk about these sorts of things, when we're pitching projects or speaking with men specifically, and it's like, well, is it really that difficult? Or they want to know more questions about it. And one of the biggest questions is, well, maybe men are just more interested in the film industry. Like, did you look at film schools? Are more men going to film school? Carissa, are more men going to film school?
No, in fact, it's about a 50-50 split. But I do have some statistics to dig into there.
Yes, because we like logic and facts.
Yes. So out of the 100 highest grossing films per year, 96% of them are directed by men. And we'll be sharing some of these resources in some of the books where you can go and do some fact checking or learning yourself. But for now, I'll just continue.
It's a little oversight.
Women make up only 23% of crew members on the 200 highest grossing films of the past 20 years. So that's all the key positions like behind the camera, director, writer, editor, cinematographer, like any of those. Well, that's just any crew position that women taking part in the creation of film and having the opportunity to get hired on these sets and to
build their resumes, to meet contacts.
Thriving careers in the film industry. In 2023, women accounted for 22% of the behind-the-scenes professionals working on the top 250 films. Women accounted for 30% of all creators, directors, writers, producers, executive producers, editors, and DOPs on broadcast network, cable, and streaming programs during the 2019-2020 TV season. And we've also done we've looked up these stats when we were pitching films too, locally in Canada. I think there's due to be a new one. So the last data is more around 2019, 2020, because it takes a couple years to build the stats and then get them out. But in Canada too, it was like less than 25% of the key roles in film and television in Canada are going to women.
Behind camera.
And then you also have to look into, of that 25%, it is mostly white women and then very small fractions of the minority groups within women, the scope of women that are being allowed these opportunities. The one thing we always love to promote is that on the projects where there was a woman in the key position, like the director, not only were there more women hired on those sets, but also more diverse range of women hired on those sets, which also is just so important for bringing women in these key roles, because they're the ones who are advocating for change, not just for themselves, but also bringing their fellow women.
The hiring was more diverse across the board, actually, not even female specific, but in general, when women are in positions of power in the film industry, the hiring practices are much more diverse.
So now when we get into the film school pocket of it, so I was reading some stories about this, and yes, it's about 50%, 50-50, pretty even. The top two film schools, it was like, I think one was 51% women and the other one was like 49% women. So like within the mid-range. Now I was reading about one female filmmaker's perspective, and when she was preparing to go to one of these schools, they send out a list of like the top 100 films must see that you need to watch before coming into the program, because like the syllabuses are built around that. And before she even went into the program, there was a disheartening, because majority of those films were all done by white cis men. And so off the top, there's like a shutout of like, you're not really in the club.
Your voice doesn't really matter.
And she said that she remembered going into the classes and the men just like raving about these cinematic masterpieces. Having watched them herself, she did not feel as creatively affected by them and didn't really understand why there was so much
and
kind
let's
of talk
remember,
about
from
them.
this book, The Female Gaze, this huge novel here, there are projects being written and directed by women. Why aren't we hearing about them? Why aren't we seeing them? Women who have done incredible things in the industry, nameless.
And so we were looking at, so after the graduating through those classes, what is happening where there's a trickle effect of like 50-50 into the classes, but drastically dropping off when you get out of the classes. And it was saying only 18% of women end up directing a like micro budget, like a first time feature, like we made our first time feature,
$40,000, or whatever you can scrape together.
Only 18% of the women involved in these film classes ever went on to create their first micro budget film, and even like of the directors making these micro budget films, 18% are women, and that's also women that didn't even go to classes. Like we would be in that 18%. We never went to film school. We've just done it ourselves. So it's exponentially lower of the 50% that goes to school that doesn't end up ever stepping foot to like make their first film. And the stats go a little farther too, to be like the percentages of women directing the top studio films, 4%. Dismal. 4%. That is just dismal. Micro budgets, which are for under $500,000, which we would be in, is 12%. And then in the kind of mid range of like 1 million to 5 million, there's 18%. So those stats are pretty staggering. And we were looking at too, like why is this happening? And one, like you have to say, it's just when funding bodies are mostly hosted by men, men usually choose to work with other men because there's the business level. They take each other seriously. There's no like sexuality that comes into play. When you have male-female relations coming into play, I think it is very, very difficult, or it seems to be very difficult, to take sexuality out of that equation. They're like, I don't want a woman in the group because that changes the dynamic. Or if there's any level of attraction to that woman, it makes things uncomfortable, or lines can be crossed. And so I think in terms of the funding, women just get shut out of the opportunities because they're not invited to the after hours parties. They're not invited to, the social networking engagement because it's the
hotel deals that happen, or the deals over drinks with the boys.
Before I go on to like one of the other factors, I'd love to share a personal story of like when we were filming our first feature film in town. There was another gentleman who was also doing a feature, and we were doing our self-funded, our like $20,000. Can we do it?
And he had make a film.
Yeah, and he had $1 million budget. I think the city was kind of coming behind it and really supporting. They were really excited about that, and I totally get it. You got someone who sold the film, they got $1 million budget, they're bringing it to town, like amazing. And so we sat down with him when we were kind of being like, all right, well, we're doing ours completely solo, we're just doing it the two of us, and we're going to make it happen. And we had a nice little sit down with him to talk about filmmaking, and he had said that after his first film, he'd got himself a ticket and gone to Cannes Film Festival. And he was like, I realized really early on, it's like, it's not the after parties. You have to go to the hotel after parties. And we were like...
Yeah, that is where he found his producer, who then helped him get funding for his project.
And I was like, I'm sorry, I have to stop you right there. And to like an aside, this gentleman is totally lovely and want all the best for him in all of his work. So this is just like a male-female perspective scenario. And I said to him, I have to stop you right there and say that although I'm really happy for you that scenario happened, we do have to acknowledge that there's a privilege that you're able to entertain those ideas. We, as we had learned many times in our 20s, cannot go to the hotel after party and be talked business to. In fact, we will likely be put in a scenario, as we have been many, many times, that is uncomfortable, where we get, you have to be like, oh, do I say something? Do I not? Do I be the bitch?
You're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. And not only would we be put in that scenario, if anything untoward should happen, the immediate question would be, well, why would you go to a hotel?
Why were you at the hotel? Why would you go?
Why would you put yourself in that position?
Right? That's like the safety. He can go there to try and make that extra deal. If something happened to us in those scenarios, the onus would be put on us for having been there in the first place. So that's just a little aside of like firsthand experience. Yeah. This is a real thing.
There's actually a couple. I just want to give some resources here. A couple documentaries that we watched. One called Half the Picture by Amy Adrian from 2018, and another one called This Changes Everything by Tom Donahue in 2019. Both of those exploring through various different females in the film industry, their experience in that process of being overly sexualized, or a lot of female writers and directors who struggle to find funding for their projects, or I think a lot of them were commenting on the fact that they did the film school, right? They did everything you're supposed to do. I did the film school, just like my male counterpart. I got out, I've invested in the micro-budget film, like my male counterpart. That went on to festivals, I got a little bit of acclaim, and then, offers should have rolled in, because that is what happened with my male counterpart. He did what he was supposed to do, he made his film, and then he got all these offers. And the females who were speaking in this documentary were like, even if I did get some offers right away, they sort of fizzled away. And a couple of them, but like they never ended up working in the industry. They got so frustrated.
Gina Davis also does a lot of work in this area of the field of representation for women on screen. And I think she had a daughter, right? And she was watching children's programming and noticing that the majority, like in these children's programs, even if it's animated, about 70% of the lead characters are male as opposed to female. Or
so not only is it behind the camera, we're giving more opportunities to men,
but it's also on screen.
What we're seeing on camera is stories and perspective through the male gaze.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot more male representation because, right, if you're a male and you're creating stories, naturally you're going to be drawn to sharing the perspective best and are most familiar with. Yeah. So they say like 70% when you actually watch and pay attention if you're watching a night of TV, they say typically about 70% of the cast will be male compared to 30%.
And when
female.
you see women on screen, are they the lead? Is the story about them? Or are they like a supporting character to the male character's experiences?
Yeah. Are they being sexualized? Are they objectified? Are they kind of just there to pass along the plot line and help on the hero's journey?
Yeah. Now, this is another factor of like, why? What happens to these women after this film school? Why aren't they getting the same opportunities? And a big thing that I think just goes along with women, it is what is coined as the confidence gap. And so 2014 Hewlett-Packard International report said that the average woman would only apply for a job position if she met 90 to 100% of the criteria, whereas men would apply even if they only met 60% of the criteria. So already right there we have like a divide.
That goddamn audacity.
Yeah. So Columbia Business School also did a study on it. They termed it honest overconfidence, or as Kat likes to say,
cocky without the credentials.
She loves that.
It's an epidemic.
She loves throwing it around. But their actual study showed that men, on average, rate their own performances as 30% better than their performance factually is.
That's wild.
Yeah. So women have learned that in order to be competitive with men in these positions, they have to be prepared to be like 3 times better than their male counterparts. So they're not even attempting to get their foot in the door with that first film because they know unless it's like can blow it out of the water and really make a splash, they're not being taken as seriously as the male counterparts who are doing something of equal or lesser value. And then we were looking also into like the modern day of female filmmaking and how, like, even at the Oscars, there has only ever been 9 women nominated for the directing category. And although the last couple years,
generations of filmmaking and how many films have been produced.
The last couple of years, there has been women who've been both nominated and won, which is amazing. And they've also been making films that have female leads, which is a huge stride. It's still only one that kind of trickles through every year. So like there's still work to be done.
But who are these women and how are they getting this opportunity?
The more recent ones in the last couple of years don't follow this, but historically between like 2004 and 2018, we had Sofia Coppola, who was nominated, Catherine Bigelow, who was nominated and won, and Greta Gerwig, who was nominated. 2 of those 3 films had male protagonists. Only one was a lead, and it was right after the Me Too movement, so it was kind of perfect timing. Mm-hmm. But all of those women are, one, white, cis and straight. So that is like, you know, pigeonholing a certain area of women that are allowing the opportunity. But on top of that, they are Sofia Coppola. Her father is a filmmaker who has been nominated and won Academy Awards. Catherine Bigelow was married to James Cameron, who also has been nominated and won those awards. And Greta Gerwig, who, what's his name? Noah Baumbach? Is that how you say it? Who was also is a filmmaker who was also previously nominated for an award. So they are already
what is her relation to him? She was dating
They're life
him,
partners.
Oh, they're partners. Okay.
Yeah. So all of them have a previous thread and connection to a gentleman who has made strides in the industry, who kind of brought them in. And
we're not saying that's the only reason that they got credit. We're saying the reason that they were possibly found themselves in position to be able to find those opportunities is because they were rubbing shoulders with the right kind of people who are getting those opportunities. And they had someone
who's already in the circle advocating for them.
Yes.
Right? Who loves and cares and advocates for them. Now, a bunch of those facts I wanted to share. There's another book. We don't have it. I haven't actually read it, but I plan to go get it and read it because I took a lot of these stats and studies from her. It's called The Wrong Kind of Women, Inside Our Revolution to Dismantle the Gods of Hollywood. Love that title.
Beautiful.
Her name is Naomi McDougall Jones. So another resource will also list that. But
a lot of great reads here,
you
folks.
can go
A lot of great watches.
if you are curious, if you are interested. Yeah, and I think other than that, we wanted to talk about 2 recent film
and so
projects that
wrapping
we
this all
watched.
around to, okay, so why not only is it really unfair for females who want to be in the film industry, but beyond that, why is this really damaging as a society?
Why is it so important to see more films by women?
Let's look at what I said about, Clara Bow, her success, and the fact that women were writing stories in the early 1900s, leading to the first wave of feminism and activism at that time. It's important for people in marginalized communities to see stories championing them, to inspire them, and elicit the movement we need to expect better for ourselves and to create those changes in the world. So the problem, if we have all, or most especially, white males of a certain age demographic creating content that everyone is consuming, that means they're most likely sharing stories from their own perspective. And so they're not being very representative of the vast array of experience in the human
depending
scope.
on the subject matter of the film especially, we feel can be extremely dangerous. And I'll take 2 examples. Honora and Adolescence are 2 projects that have come out recently.
2 highly acclaimed projects we watched.
Both speak on very dangerous subject matter for women: sex work and femicide.
Femicide
And although I think it's
assault.
great to have all perspectives, yes, it's great to have the male perspective and the male sides of these stories too. We know that predominantly the male voices are getting the chance to get greenlit, to get the funding, to get filmed. We need to be hearing and getting the chance to watch more of these stories that affect women and are very dangerous, can be very dangerous for women, by women through the lens of the female gaze. They need to be filmed by women who really understand the lived experience of being a woman identifying individual and dealing with the world of sex work or dealing with the world of assault and femicide.
Yeah. So to very specifically talk about these 2 projects without giving any information away, Honora being supposed to be about a female sex worker. However, when we watched it, we were like, we don't really know much about this character. Does she have a family? What are her hopes and dreams? We didn't really get a look at her inside perspective and experience.
Well, it was quite a long film.
It was a very long film, and most of the time she was sort of like being shuffled along by a group of male leads.
Well, to break it down to like the first 4, it's like over 2 hours, but the first 40 minutes of the film were like her and this male character kind of building their relationship, although it didn't really go too deep. We didn't find out anything about her, really like her family, what she thinks, what she feels about it all. And she's just kind of in interaction with him. And then the remainder of the last like hour and 40 minutes is more about the Russian rich
like a mafia world
kind of scenario,
and her, how they're using her to try and get to him.
3 men who have her captive, essentially chasing this other male individual around the town. So we're not really, this film, although it's titled after the woman,
it was lauded as
really
a modern perspective about sex work, right? So I'm like, well, I think that, in my opinion, is a project where I think if we're going to be sharing stories like that, they should be showcasing the perspective of the woman who's in that experience, right? Or we should at least be brought a little more intimately into her own personal reflections. We should know what she thinks and feels about the world.
And I mean, although it wasn't like, a fairy tale ending per se, so it's not like it was a grossly like naive version of it, but I do think it glamorized sex work a little bit. Like it glamorized the experience of it, of what young women who be watching that might expect a scenario of the industry of sex work might be. And it's often not, I mean, I don't want to speak too much on it because I don't work in the industry.
The fact is, it's not bad that we have projects that showcase the male perspective, okay? That is a fair perspective. All perspectives in life should be showcased. The problem is that most of the perspectives that are being shared are only or predominantly male.
I wanted to finish my point there, though, was like that I think it's really dangerous to glamorize that line of work, because that line of work can be very dangerous, especially because with, stuff we're learning right now in our documentary world too, is like sex trafficking is definitely very prevalent right now. And there's also new age versions of it with OnlyFans for like survival sex, of young women seeing these things. You're like, oh, I'll get a handbag. Oh, I'll get Lululemon pants. I'll get these things if I go and, partake in this. And I'm like, but it's also very dangerous. And you read a lot of stories of how they don't come home, or, the stuff that's happening in Dubai, or like they end up on the side of a woman from OnlyFans ended up on like the side of the road with most of her bones broken in her body, because it seemed like, oh, there's wealthy men. I can be treated like a princess, do a couple things and come home and I've got a chunk of money and all these nice things. And it's like, yes, but you can also be very much taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And
at what cost?
Male anger and femicide and assault is on the rise from a lot of influencers. It can be very dangerous too. And I think films like that, coming from the male perspective, coming from the male gaze, and focusing on that storyline of it, it sets a lot of, especially younger, naive individuals who might be curious about sex work. I think it sets them up for unrealistic expectations where they could get themselves into a lot of trouble. So personally, I feel a little like, ugh, about that.
Yes. And then adolescence, we have another story about femicide, right? So that there's a rampant movement. This one is particularly set in the UK, of young boys being drawn in by very misogynist perspectives in the online social media space, and and it's garnering a deep hatred towards women, so much so that they are being pushed to assault, and in some cases kill young women who they feel are not giving them adequate attention that they deserve.
And we have a lot of talk about the male loneliness epidemic happening right now. And what's that word? In the show, she used incel. A lot of talk about like, incel, and being like, the perspective that I was really irked about in this show was they really didn't talk, they didn't talk much about the girl. We didn't get to know much of her. We didn't see her family. We saw one friend be upset, but the only talk about it really was that she was a bully and calling this kid an incel, or like the stuff that he was sharing.
She was calling him out on social media for posting photos of
sexually
women, or
explicit photos of women.
Yeah, right. So it was like, oh, cyberbullying. The point here being the project was nicely shot. It was a very technical project of and is lauded for this, that it had every episode was one shot directly through. There was no cuts, and this project was specifically written by a gentleman who starred in it, who wanted to showcase the impacts that this has on the family.
And from the father of like passing down the lineage.
Right. And I'm not saying that perspective isn't interesting or important to share. Just showing the side of the boy who's committed this crime, trying to figure out why, seeing the impact on his family, the impact in the school. All of that is important. But what's equally important is to see the other side of it. Yeah. From the victim's perspective, what is her experience? How did this become her situation? What is her family going through afterwards? So I'm not just crediting that project. The problem is we're not seeing enough projects being made that showcase the other side of the story.
Yeah, and why? Because this gentleman is an actor who's done well in the past couple of years. He has some films that have done well in the past couple of years. He had another project that did well and essentially got greenlit for a series before he even thought of this idea, because I read an article from him, and I'm like, that is where it's dangerous. We're only the male sides of these stories are getting greenlit relatively easily, and the female sides of these stories are not getting greenlit, and we like victims.
Anyone watching adolescence specifically, right, is drawn into the world of the perpetrator and his family. And so if that is, and we're not seeing anything about the victim or that side. So what does that sort of signal to us? The only important story here is the story of the perpetrator. This poor young boy, and how did he get drawn into this by cyberbullying and all these. And
we do need to understand why. We need to understand from the male perspective why this is happening, but we also need to be focusing on, no, it's not bullying. It's a woman who called a man out for sexual exploitation online, and then she got murdered. That's not her. That's not normal. That's not okay. A boy being lonely because he got bullied. That's never okay. But I'm just also the fact of it as being like, because it feels like such a male thing too. Oh, this cinematic masterpiece of a show, and it's like we're talking about the new
very real,
the new rise of femicide. Okay, we're talking about femicide. This is a very real and very dangerous thing.
Children committing femicide. And being victims of femicide.
So is this really the right project to be touting a cinematic masterpiece? I get that it gets attention. It sparks attention because it's something different. But I'm like, are we also going to greenlight projects where the women are speaking and through a female director's gaze and female cinematographer?
So that anyone watching could understand what the experience is for the person who the crime is being perpetrated on.
Because if we're not really speaking on the victim, we're just making them a number. We're making them a statistics. We're not making them a very real, tangible human being who lost their life. That show does not.
And we're signaling to anyone consuming this content that part of the story is not important. It's not worth seeing. It's not worth hearing. It's not worth speaking on.
It's the same problem.
That's dangerous.
With the Nora, the two females in the storylines. They're not full fleshed out human beings. There's no sympathies or attachment for them because they were never fully built up as a character that we got to relate to. They're just a number. They're just a woman. They're just a statistic, and that's so dangerous. I don't know how else to describe it. It actually makes my blood boil a bit because it's so dangerous.
Yeah. And watching it. So to wrap it all up here, I think watching those things, it's easy to get a little bit fired, and then you have to stop and take your step back and say, no, that perspective can be equally as important as the perspective I would choose to show in these stories, which is the female perspective. The problem is that really more so only men are being able to share their perspectives
or they are more easily being granted opportunities to tell their stories.
Share and showcase these stories, highlighting male perspectives.
Yeah.
And so what needs to happen here is we do need, and beyond female, male, more types of voices,
diverse,
underrepresented voices, having the opportunity, getting funding, getting support to be able to share more projects that showcase more perspectives than the white male, so that all underrepresented voices out there from all demographics of life can start seeing themselves in the content that we consume, can start seeing their stories shared and showcased, so that we can all feel that we have a place in this world and all of our stories are equally as important.
And how do we do that? We drop egos, as we need to all across the board in life. We drop egos. We be open to collaboration. We be open to working with carriers of a voice that's different than yours. When you have positions of leadership, inviting different voices and perspectives in to create that project and bringing those voices to the forefront. I also want to I don't want to be fully, depressing about how difficult it is to make films. It is, and it always has been, whether, regardless of your sex, gender, race, religion, it's a tough industry, right? But the one thing that we can say in terms of our mentorship is you need to get so clear on your voice. You need to be so clear on what your voice is, what you're impassioned by, and what it is that you want your art to speak on. And
what stories are you here to tell and why?
And I truly believe that you will find your opportunities, you will find the right audience, you will find the right people to collaborate with who are also fired up about those subject matters. But you can make beautiful art with very little amounts of money. Maybe you can't make a cinematic masterpiece like Adolescence, but you know what? Very simple stories with simple equipment, just done well, and that have heart, that reach people, that talk about honest authenticity.
Eventually, you will get seen and heard. Yeah. And I think this actually goes well beyond the film industry, right? Yeah. We found ourselves frustrated with the film industry and what we were seeing and feeling. So we did some research, okay? So I've watched some documentaries, I've read some books. I started searching for the females in the industry. I might not be having their names showcased to me. Their projects might not be on as big of screens as some of the male counterparts, but they do exist. They're here in this book. So I decided to start sourcing and consuming things created by the women that I want to see and hear from, right? So whatever field or industry you're in, if you feel that frustration, well, there are people out there like yourself who are creating or working in that field. Start sourcing their names. Start doing the research. Start
Find the listening to those voices and add to amplifying those voices. Start talking about them more. Start sharing them with your groups more. Start sharing their work on your social media. Find the voices, amplify those voices, and by doing that, hopefully we continue to open up more rooms and more doors for voices like that to be told.
Be cautious about what you are consuming and then what you are sharing through that. Amplify the voices that you want to see and hear more in the world. And not just
believing the easily digestible media that comes our way, because it is limited perspective. It is.
So get more curious and
go out, read, watch, learn, dig in, and have a little heart. Have a lot of heart. Find your heart and be authentic and genuine to it, and it will shine through. It will find its spot, and people want that.
No matter what, if you feel your voice isn't being heard or you're being shushed, keep using it, okay?
Yeah.
Just keep screaming from the rooftop. Eventually it's going to stick, okay? There's a need for you, for whatever your story is, for whatever you have to offer this world, even if the funding bodies or the opportunities, the places you're seeking are telling you your voice isn't important or as important or there's no space for it.
It is.
It is. It's very important. There's a space for it. Find ways to create that space. If you're not finding it given to you, create them. Create the spaces, use your voice, keep sharing.
And own it. Own your story.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've been listening to The Sister Strain.
If you've got something you'd like to share with us, reach out to us. contact@sisterstrain.com.
Yours in sistership,
The Sister Strain.